Hi everyone, welcome to the October 9th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon. I'll be joined in just a moment by my co-host Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to do some handicapping of Breeders' Cup preps this weekend at Keeneland and Belmont Park. The major stakes races are taking place at Belmont this weekend. They've got a slate of 5 graded stakes, 4 grade 1s. We're going to talk about 3 of those stakes races that are part of the late pick 5 sequence, and we'll go through all of those races in the late pick 5 sequence at Belmont races 7 through 11. But we're going to start things off at Keeneland, where their big race on Saturday is the Queen Elizabeth II Challenge Cup for the 3-year-old fillies, going 1.1 miles on the turf course. And Craig, this race has drawn some of the best 3-year-old filly turf horses out there, though I do notice there's the absence of Sharing, who I heard was pointing to this race. I don't know if she had a setback or something, but she's not in this field. Perhaps that makes it a more competitive affair.
Yeah, I would say so. I would imagine she would have been the heavy favorite instead. Looking at our preview page on TimeformUS is pretty crazy. And at our spotlight figure, I think every single horse in the field ranges from a 106 to a 112, which isn't much of a spread at all. So it looks like a fairly deep, contentious race, but that said, having watched the last race of Magic Attitude, I really think she's strongly the horse to beat in here. I mean, she is the 5-2 morning line favorite, so it's no big surprise there. But I actually think she rates a much better shot than that. I think visually her race was just a lot better than what we've been seeing from some of the others, like Harvey's Little Goyle, Sweet Melania, Antoinette. I mean, they've all run fine, but I just haven't seen that kind of brilliance that I think maybe I saw with Magic Attitude.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion with Magic Attitude because on the one hand, she was so visually impressive last time, as you pointed out, and I completely agree with that assessment. On the other hand, we talked about that Belmont Oaks beforehand. That was not a strong field. I mean, Antoinette is back in here, and Antoinette ran fine to be second, but I don't think either of us think very much of her, especially not in this tougher race. And this is a much more competitive spot for Magic Attitude. Maybe she's just going to prove better than these once again, because I agree she was so impressive last time. But if she's the favorite in here, and I don't disagree that she should be, but I just do think this is a much tougher spot than the Belmont Oaks, and I wouldn't totally dismiss those horses coming out of the Dueling Grounds Oaks at Kentucky Downs, Harvey's Little Goyle, and even Micheline, who won that race, because just going to talk briefly about the pace situation in here. We're not projecting a situation favoring horses on or near the lead, but I don't see a ton of speed in this race. I mean, Antoinette has been on top of some very slow paces, setting the pace in her recent starts, but she doesn't have that much speed. And Sweet Melania, maybe she's in front, as the pace projector suggests. She's coming out of some shorter races, but I don't see that much speed in here. And I just think that could make that could allow Harvey's Little Goyle to sit the right trip, because she does have the tactical speed to be close. And I thought that she ran the best race in the Dueling Grounds Oaks last time, because she was stalking 3 wide the entire way, didn't have any cover, was forced to make an early move to the front, probably sooner than you really wanted to in that long stretch at Kentucky Downs, and she still almost held on over Micheline, who was able to make the final run. I think Harvey's Little Goyle is better than that last effort, and she's just been in great form recently, so I'm going to take her. She's the second choice on the morning line. We'll see how big of a difference there is between her and Magic Attitude and price, but I prefer her as the horse that could get the jump on the favorite.
Yeah, I have no problem with her. She's certainly run well all year. We've talked about her several times. She had that big race at Aqueduct early in the year, and I think we've both been of the opinion that she's probably better on turf. That Aqueduct dirt track that she ran so well on was kind of one of those crazy, really slow aqueduct tracks that probably played a little more like a turf race than a dirt race. So I have no problem with her. Even Sweet Melania, I have questions about the distance, but she's proven she can go wire to wire. She wouldn't surprise me in here. She's been running improving TimeformUS speed figures every single time out on turf. So yeah, I didn't want to make it like I think Magic Attitude it's a single or anything like that, but I don't. The problem for me in here was I couldn't really find a price I wanted to latch on to, and I do think she's probably the horse to beat. So it's going to be one of those where I watch the race, monitor the odds, and kind of look and see if anybody falls through the cracks.
Yeah, I would say the horse that I'm against in this race is Sweet Melania, because she's gotten just fantastic trips in her 2 starts so far this year. She was able to set a slow pace in that Wonder Again off the layoff, going her preferred 1 mile distance. And then last time out in the Lake George, she was 3-5 in that race, and she was not supposed to lose. I mean, she saved ground around both turns. A big hole opened up for her to come through at the top of the stretch. You're just not supposed to lose with that kind of trip when you're the odds-on favorite. And the winner did get a good trip as well, but she just came and ran her down, and selflessly, in my opinion, was simply better than Sweet Melania last time. And as you said, I'm not convinced that she really wants to go farther. She's now stretching out an extra furlong to 1 1/8. So she was the one that I just didn't want in here, especially if she's as low as 7-2. And I'd much prefer Micheline, who's 6-1 in the line. I know that she got the better trip last time, in my opinion, in the Dueling Grounds Oaks, but she's been subtly improving throughout her 3-year-old season. I thought she had a bit of a trip last 2 back in the Lake George behind Sweet Melania. She was just kind of in traffic for the entire stretch drive, and she's going to love the 1 1/8 distance. So I'm not totally against her, even though I prefer Harvey's Logoyle. I would certainly use Micheline with her.
Yeah, and for me, I guess you kind of hinted at already. The one I'd really be against, and not that she's a short price, is Antoinette. I just don't think she's as good at these. She's also had some really easy trips on the front end and couldn't hold off Magic Attitude, so it's hard for me to see her doing that here.
Yeah, we're on the same page with her. Okay, let's move on to that late pick 5 sequence at Belmont Park on Saturday. As I said, it's races 7 through 11. Right in the middle of this sequence, we've got those 3 graded stakes races, 2 of them grade 1s. We'll get to that in a little bit. But we're starting off with the 7th race at Maiden Special Weight, going 1 1/16 on the Widener turf course for the 2-year-olds. And this is the kind of race that's difficult because it's just filled with first-time starters. You're probably going to want to watch the tote board a little bit before you play this. But we should start the conversation with one of the horses that does have experience, and that's the likely favorite, the number 4 Hardison for Belmont. This horse finished 3rd in a very fast maiden race at Saratoga towards the end of the meet. Restored Order is a Todd Pletcher horse that looks to have some talent. He won that race. And Hardison, to me, just looked pretty green. Didn't look like he really knew what he was doing out there, but he did do some running in the stretch to get up for 3rd.
He did. He got a 94 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort there. I have to admit, I'm a little leery of this figure so far. I think only one horse has run back, Hidden Enemy. He didn't run particularly well in a much tougher spot, admittedly. But there were just some pretty big jump outs first out, so I'm not going to put... I wouldn't just go bet this horse based on the speed figure. It's one I'm monitoring and going to keep a close eye on. And I do think there's some dangerous firsters in here. I think you have to start with Chad Brown's Connick's Key. He's certainly one out of Flintshire, has some turf breeding on the female side. He's obviously always going to be dangerous. And then Christophe Clement has a couple in here as well. And Big Everest and... who's the Stand with Mo, who both of those, he's certainly proven to be able to win with these turf horses first time out. So for me, if I was playing, I'm going to spread a little bit in here. I probably would still use the favorite, the morning line favorite Hardison, but I'm going to use some of those firsters as well.
Yeah, I think there are some very dangerous firsters in this race. Connick's Key, as you said, for Chad Brown, those horses always merit some consideration. This one is a Juddmonte homebred, and they bred their mare Routine to their sire Flintshire. So make of that what you will. Flintshire has not yet had any success as a sire. I think his starters so far all across the board are 0 for 19. We'll see. I don't know if that means anything because Flintshire was such a late developing horse himself. So maybe his progeny will also be late developers. We'll see about that. This horse has been working okay as far as I can tell. I only was able to see the workouts at Saratoga more than a month ago at this point. He was outworked by this horse Realm of Law, who was highly regarded, also a Juddmonte horse for Chad Brown. He was 3rd, a little bit unlucky in his debut at Belmont a couple weeks ago. Seems like Connick's Key's probably picked it up in his recent workouts, so I'll see what we get from him. Of the firsters, I prefer the number 5 Big Everest for Christophe Clement. I mean, Christophe Clement can certainly win with first-time starters, and he's just having a stellar year with his 2-year-olds all over the place, especially on the turf. Not just with first-time starters, but with all of his 2-year-old starters so far in 2020. He's 8 for 23. 35%, winning at more than a $3 ROI. So he's just having a fantastic year with the juveniles so far. The Big Everest by the Gurkha, who was a multiple Group 1 winning miler in Europe. The Dam was an American horse who was stakes placed on the turf. And they bought this one for over $300,000 at the Arcana sale in France earlier this year. That's actually a 2-year-old in training sale. So they saw this one breeze over the turf course before they paid that much money. And seems like this horse is training well, so I put him on top. I'd also use at a bigger price the number 12 Spirit Maker for Todd Pletcher. He doesn't have obvious turf pedigree, but Empire Maker can get turf horses. They paid a lot of money for this one as well. And just watching his workouts, it seems like he's got that high striding action, the kind of horse that should be able to translate to the turf. He was working with this horse named Known Agenda, who I think debuted couple weeks ago at Belmont in a 6.5 furlong race. He was second to that Chad Brown horse, Highly Motivated, and I didn't see the TimeformUS speed figure, but the buyer was, I think, a 76. So maybe Spirit Maker can run a little bit. And then the others, there'll be bigger prices. Watch the board or listen to Nair's excellent paddock analyst Maggie Wolfendale for some clues with these horses, because others do have pedigree in this race.
Yeah, Spirit Maker was the one I was going to ask about specifically, so you covered that pretty well. Just one. This is a race I'm definitely glad it is the first race in the sequence, which we haven't always seen as of late, but that always gives us some clues.
Yeah, they weren't as kind to us with the last race in this sequence, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's first move on to those stakes races. The 8th race at Belmont is the Flower Bowl, Grade 1, going 1.25 miles on the inner turf course for the fillies and mares. And this is a pretty competitive race. Chad Brown has entered 3 horses. They're pretty hard to separate. I grouped them all pretty closely on the morning line. I honestly don't really have a strong idea about who's going to be favored in this race because they all just look very similar. I think trips, though, are going to matter a lot because most of these horses do like to come from off the pace.
Yeah, it's an interesting race. I was actually surprised we didn't have a label on this from on the pace projector saying that it was a race going to favor horses on or near the lead. I mean, we have the 1 Canberra Park shown up on the lead along with the 6 Nay Lady Nay, and I wouldn't particularly say either one of those is anything resembling a front runner. I know Canberra Park won the QE2 at Keeneland last year, wire to wire, but that was a race where she almost had it by default. And Nay Lady Nay is basically never on the lead, so it's a race with very little pace, and I think that's going to play a part. And again, this is one of those playing vertical bets. It's probably going to come down to odds. If I had to make a top pick, I would probably go outside the Chad Brown horses and look at Shug Mckay's Civil Union. I like the way she's developed this year. I really like her good tactical speed that she has. She's still able to finish off her races. She overcame a really slow pace last time out with all blue fractions. Got up to win that Grade 2 Glens Falls. So in a wide open race, I mean, I guess if I have to make a top pick, it would be her. I also like my sister Nat's last race behind Civil Union. It was a race with no pace at a longer distance. She did make that good late run, but this is a little bit of a turn back in distance. So, you know, and she could very well be facing the same scenario. So that's why I went with Civil Union just over her by the narrow margin.
Yeah, I completely agree with your assessment of the Glens Falls. That was a crawling pace, and initially when I watched it, I was a little bit disappointed that my sister Nat didn't get up because she looked like the best horse coming into that race, but you see those pace figures, and it's just so difficult to come from as far back as she was when you've got that situation, and when you're running against a legitimately good horse like Civil Union, who has really improved this year for Shug Mckay. I just thought Civil Union got the much better trip last time, and if they're similar prices once again, I would be inclined to take my sister Nat out of this race. I am a little bit concerned about what you said, the distance. I do think the longer the better for her, so maybe 1.25 miles is going to be a little bit short. But, I mean, even though she lost that prior 1.25 mile race in New York over at Belmont in the summer, she was facing Mean Mary that day, and Mean Mary is just one of the best fillies and mares in the country on the turf. I actually don't know where she is. I don't know if she's trading up to the Breeders' Cup out of the Diana. She missed this last round of preps, now that I think about it. But she's a very talented horse. My problem, though, with the Glens Falls overall, and there are 4 horses in this race coming out of the Glens Falls, is that group of fillies that ran in the Glens Falls and the Weah, they're just I don't think they're the best fillies out there, and maybe this isn't the strongest grade one either, but I just thought that some new faces could be dangerous coming into that group, and that's why I put Cambier Park on top. We talked about her last race on the Pacecast recently when she was the beaten 4-5 favorite in the Canadian. I know you didn't like what you saw. I was willing to give her a pass for that race because I just didn't think she got a very good ride. They were really moving down the backstretch. There was a fast pace. And for whatever reason, the Canadian rider who was on her in that race decided to make a mid-race move to the lead about 5 furlongs from home, challenge going about 3 to 4 wide on the far turn. That's just not going to really work out too often in turf races. And I don't know why they had to do that because she's not this confirmed front runner. She can come from off the pace. And she paid the price at the end of that race. Yes, she was beaten by an inferior horse. I don't know where the winner's performance came from, but Cambier Park still earned a respectable speed figure for a horse coming off a year-long layoff. And as a 3-year-old, she was running numbers that put her in the mix. And if she can now take that step forward as a 4-year-old second off the layoff, I just think she makes a ton of sense in here. I'm not that worried about the 1.25 miles, and she could have that pace advantage. I don't know if she's going to be on the lead as the pace projector indicates, but she was successful going to the front of the Queen Elizabeth last year, so I just think she's going to trip out, and she might be the best horse anyway.
Yeah, and one important note about that race, people just looking at past performances it's just one of those things you can overlook is a 1.1 miles at Woodbine is just one turn, which I think personally is tougher when the pace gets quick. It really sets it up for those closing types. So yeah, I've kind of backtracked a little after I watched that race again. I don't have any problem with Cambier Park. The one horse I'm not really a big fan of in here is Nay Lady Nay. I think she got a really solid pace at Laurel last time. She won easily, but even on her best day, her speed figures she ran a 1:17 last time, which was her career best. And I think she'd probably need to do that or better. And I just think this is much tougher competition and a tougher trip. So if I had to pick one horse I was against, it would be that one.
I'm always a little leery of these horses that Chad Brown kind of resists running at the NYRA circuit. In her career, she's run 8 times. She's 5 for 6 at other venues, and she's 0 for 2 at NYRA. Those 2 prior races at Belmont came very early in her career, and she's a better horse now. But I just always find that to be a little curious. I feel like Chad Brown doesn't... It just says something about how he regards these horses when he continually runs them out of town. And he's finally taking the shot in a grade 1 with her. We'll see how she does. I feel like she's really relished some softer turf courses when she's been most successful with her big speed figures, both at Churchill last year and most recently at Laurel. I don't think that those numbers are a really true indication of where she's at because they would suggest she's the best horse in this race, and I don't quite buy that. So I'm kind of with you on her, and I'd be more inclined to look at a horse like La Signore at a bigger price. I worry about the 1.25 miles for her, but she's got speed figures that put her right in the mix, and she's relaxed more now as a 5-year-old, whereas she was very headstrong earlier in her career. So maybe that's going to help her get the distance. We'll see. But I thought Cambier Park was the right horse to take. Moving on to the 9th race at Belmont, the Grade 1 Jockey Club Gold Cup, really the feature race on Saturday. And this is not a Jockey Club Gold Cup for the ages. You just don't have the top horses in either the 3-year-old or the older horse division competing in this race. And that's not to knock Tacitus, because Tacitus is a very nice horse. He, along with everybody else in this field, is still seeking their first Grade 1 victory ever. But he's run well enough to win a race like this a number of times in the past, and he's just way the horse to beat. The problem is he's still Tacitus.
Yeah, it seems like they just have some of these horses on the NYRA circuit that you want to write off, and they keep finding spots where you almost can't write them off. And I think that's the case with Tacitus here. I know he has his anti-fan club out there, the people who just love to rip him. But I mean, he is a really good horse. He runs fast speed figures all the time. And in spots like this, even though this is a Grade 1, I don't think anybody would consider this a real Grade 1 type field. It's almost like a Grade 3. So it looks to me like he almost has this field over a barrel. I mean, I know we have the Todd Pletcher 3 for 3 Happy Saver as a 3-year-old. Maybe he could improve, but he's just basically run the same race 3 times on our speed figures. We have the other 3-year-old Mystic Guide who won the Jim Dandy, but hasn't run particularly quick this year. And they're the most likely. I guess Prioritize. He had a little bit of a rough trip in that Woodward where he was wide on both turns. But for me, it's still just hard to get past Tacitus. I know the inclination is to want to do it and to try to find somebody to beat him because he just doesn't find the winner circle all that often. But for me, it was really tough here to come up with a logical alternative.
Yeah, the thing about Tacitus is you pretty much know what you're getting from him. He's going to run one of those TimeformUS speed figures in the low 120s, a buyer right around 100. That's just what he does almost every time. He gets the 1.25 mile distance. He doesn't really have a ton of fight in him, but when he faces a field that he's superior to, he gets the job done, as he did in the Suburban back in July. His one vulnerability is if one of these up-and-coming horses, whether it be the 3-year-olds or the improving Prioritize, if they take a big step forward, because I don't see a big step forward coming from Tacitus. Now, he probably doesn't have to win this race because it would be a big ask to get one of the others to improve that much, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that it could happen. So it just really depends on how short of a price you want to take on Tacitus. I'm not sure that I really want to bet him if he's 4 to 5 in this race, but I do acknowledge he's the horse to beat. I will say, of the horses that could beat that are his main challengers, the one that I'm probably most against is Happy Saver, especially if he's going to be the shortest price of these challengers. His last race in the Tessio, it just left me a little bit cold. He was 1 to 5 in that race for a reason. I mean, Monday Morning quarterback who was second. He's a nice horse. I mean, I would disregard his race after that when he ran on the turf. He just didn't handle it. But Happy Saver was supposed to beat that horse pretty soundly. And Trevor McCarthy really had to get after him coming to the quarter pole to even get on terms with that horse and then to put him away. I know the pace was on the slowish side, but I was expecting him to win that race with greater ease, and I'm not sure that I want to bet him off that last performance. How did you feel about Happy Saver?
Yeah, we're in the same boat. I don't like him at all as the 2 to 1 second choice. I think he's kind of garnered a big reputation off his debut, which I think was back on Belmont Day, if memory serves. It might have been the day before, but I've just never been that impressed, even though he's winning pretty easily. He just hasn't run particularly fast, so he's the one I would be against. If I was going to pick one of them to beat him, it would probably be Mystic Guide. We've already seen Jesus' team come back, run a well-beaten but good third in the Preakness, so at least we know there was some quality in that field. He's a horse who seems to be moving in the right direction. If I had to pick one that was going to be the upsetter, it would be him before I picked Happy Saver.
Yeah, and that's where I'm going. I'm sticking with my boy Mystic Guide, who I've liked since his career debut. I've been high on this horse, and he does have to improve to beat Tacitus. I mean, I'm going to make no bones about it. He's got to run by far the best race of his career, but he has been improving with every single start. I mean, his speed figures make that very obvious. He just seems to improve his figure by about 3 to 5 points every time. So if he can get up to that 120 level, I think he's going to be a danger to Tacitus. And I see no reason why he's not going to relish the 1.25 mile distance. His damn music note could really run any distance. The Ghost Sappers, I mean, the best ones don't seem to have that many distance limitations. And he just runs like a horse that's a true grinder, like he's just going to keep coming at his foes. And I liked his race first-time blinkers in the Jim Dandy last time. He seemed to move into the race more easily. Jose Ortiz, Mystic Guide just took him there, whereas in past races, Jose had to get after Mystic Guide a little bit, like in the Peter Pan, where he just seemed to sort of get lost and get shuffled back behind Country Grammar coming to the top of the stretch and be left with too much to do. So in this smaller field, I'm hoping he works out the right trip and can put himself on within striking distance of Tacitus at the top of the stretch. And I'm just hoping he takes that next step forward. Like I said, I'm a fan of this horse, but he's probably going to be around the third choice in this race, and that's good enough for me. And I just couldn't quite make the case for the other horse that's logical, Prioritize. I'm not a big weight guy, but this is a situation where I think you do have to recognize that weight probably made a big difference in the Woodward last time. You'll see if you've got the weight-adjusted TimeformUS speed figures turned on. He and Tacitus finished just a length apart in that race. Prioritize got a 115 and Tacitus got a 122, and that's because there's a 9-pound weight shift in Tacitus's favor in this race. So that just makes it difficult for me to take Prioritize in here.
Yeah, and I tried to make a case for him, and for me, it's similar. The weight is an issue, and he's just not fast enough. He's not one of these young 3-year-olds. He's a 5-year-old gelding at this point. I mean, they can still get better at this age, but for him to improve that much would be a lot bigger leap. As I mentioned, he was wide last time on both turns, but there wasn't a lot of early pace around that first turn, so losing ground on that turn probably didn't mean a whole lot. So yeah, I'm with you on him. I would make Mystic Guide my top pick like you would, just from a value perspective. Well, I think that Tacitus is clearly the horse to beat, but there's just not going to be any value. Like you said, I would never want to bet Tacitus at 4-5. I rarely want to bet anyone at 4-5, but certainly not a horse like him.
Moving on to the final stakes race on this card at Belmont Park, the fourth leg of this pick 5 sequence is the Sands Point Grade 2 going 1 mile, 1 turn on the Widener turf course for the 3-year-old fillies. And Chad Brown has a record of winning this race in past years. I think he's won 5 of the last 6 editions of the Sands Point. And he's got 2 of the strongest players in this race, in Selflessly and Tamahir. Selflessly is probably the horse to beat after upsetting Sweet Melania last time. Somehow she got dismissed at 14-1, that Lake George. You almost never see a Chad Brown horse go off at that kind of price in a turf-graded stakes race. Maybe that had something to do with the rider that was on her that day. But she really ran, and it's looking like that seasonal debut in the Wonder again, that's the outlier in her past performances, because all of her other races are good, and if she repeats that Lake George, she's just the horse to beat.
She is. I will be curious to hear your thoughts on Tamahir, the French horse, his shipper, who's probably the horse to beat. But, it's just one of those. Selflessly did get a really nice trip last time. She was able to wear down Sweet Melania, who we talked about. But it's hard for me to get overly excited about her. No real knocks. I mean, she always runs her best race, but it would be hard for me to take her as a favorite. So if I had to make a top pick, it would be the other Chad Brown, Tamahir, the shipper. The other horse I have to talk about is Miss J. Mckay, who ran a huge figure in that sprint at Kentucky Downs last time. Normally, coming out of Kentucky Downs, that's a figure I'd be really leery of, but I did time these races myself from video. There were plenty of races that day at 6.5 furlongs and similar distances on the card. So for me, it's just a question of if she can handle the mile. But at that kind of speed figure, she's certainly one I'm going to use in the pick 5.
Yeah, regarding those Chad Brown horses, I actually picked Selflessly on top. I liked her last race. I know she got a good trip. I just thought she ran really well, and the others are going to have to improve to beat her going the mile, which is her best distance. So I like Selflessly in here. I don't love the price. She's just where I landed. As for the other Chad Brown horse, that European shipper, Tamahir, look, her last race, you can go and watch it, that pre-La Sorolina at La Teste Bouche. That was very impressive. She was not beating a strong field that day. And she really hasn't faced the best 3-year-olds over in France in any of her races. She's been in some weaker spots. The horse who was second to her last time, Mary's France, she did run in the U.S. after that. She was transferred to Graham Motion, and she competed in a non-winners of one allowance race a couple weeks ago at Belmont. She finished 5th, only beaten about a length. She's okay. Certainly not good enough to compete in a race like this. Tamahir, she was really impressive last time. I wonder if it was the soft ground that allowed her to win that race by such a margin, because her prior races on firm turf just don't nearly measure up to that, and you're wondering what improved her last time. Maybe it was the soft ground. The other thing is, Chad Brown, while he has a reputation for doing excellent work with foreign shippers, and if you look up the stats in general, he has very strong numbers with foreign shippers, but 3-year-old foreign shippers specifically on the turf over the past 5 years, he's just 3 for 37, winning at 8% with a 79-cent ROI. And in graded stakes with those 3-year-old foreign shippers, he's 0 for 13 over the past 5 years. Maybe that's just a statistical anomaly, because his numbers with 4-year-old and up horses in that same sample are excellent. But it's just kind of odd that he doesn't seem to do as well with 3-year-olds. So, I don't know. I have some questions about this horse, but based on her last race, she does appear to have talent. As for that horse you brought up, Miss J. Mckay, she's a difficult call for me, and I initially was considering her, and I ultimately decided to leave her out. I just have trouble buying that last speed figure, and generally I don't put a whole lot of stock in Kentucky Downs form. It just seems like those races don't always get repeated, and that figure does seem high for a few horses in that race. I'm not saying that the figure is wrong. I just wonder if it's going to be predictive moving forward. And Miss J. Mckay has got one of these weird pedigrees where her sire, Hangover Kid, could run all day. Her dam was a pure sprinter, like a 5-furlong kind of horse. So you just wonder who she really takes after. I'm not sure, and I ultimately decided to go against her here. I mean, the other horse I guess you could consider is Speak to Me of Summer. I just think she's gotten good trips in her races, and I don't see the pace really working in her advantage.
Yeah, I was going to bring her up because she is only 3-1 on the morning line, a close third choice. But for me, she's just not fast enough. She has our top TimeformUS speed figures of 104. She would need to improve quite a bit, and that's not what I'm looking for in a horse that's going to be bet.
Before we move on, one more horse I want to mention that I don't think we should totally dismiss in this race is the number 7 Pure Wow. She's never won on the turf, and she's coming out of some nominaries of one allowance race. She's never faced stakes company, at least as a 3-year-old, but she is projected to have a pace advantage by the pace projector. She's going to be on the lead. They're really, I mean, depending on what Miss J. Mckay does, she's not a front runner, but she's coming out of sprint races. If she applies pressure, Pure Wow could have it all to herself on the front end, and her recent speed figures, while they're not quite at the level of a horse like Selflessly, they're not that far off the horses coming out of stakes races. So I don't want to totally dismiss her, because we've seen it before where they just let the pace really slow down on the front end, and a horse that maybe seem inferior like Pure Wow takes them a long way up front.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I used one price horse in this race, it would be Pure Wow, just because we've seen this story play out before, and she clearly is the only speed in the race. I mean, Miss Jim Mckay has shown a pretty far back second, and Miss J. Mckay has shown a fairly far back second, and she's a closing sprinter who I don't think's ever been in the lead early in her life. So she will certainly be out there all alone, and it just depends how easy a trip she gets. So at the big price she's going to be, she will be on my pick 5 tickets.
All right, let's close things out with the 11th race, the final leg of this pick 5 sequence, and it's a real skullbuster here because it's another one. It's a maiden race for 2-year-olds, going 6 furlongs on the turf, and it's a race that's filled with first-time starters, so you do have to watch the board a little bit. I don't like them carding these races as the last race of the day. I think it really works against multi-race players and discourages players from who are trying to put a small amount of money into these wagers because you're just kind of going blind into the last race. At least, though, in this race, you do have a couple horses with experience who seem like strong contenders, particularly the number 2 Herald Angel, who, if she repeats her first race at Saratoga, she's going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, she will. I certainly think she's a horse you got to use. She was probably thrown prematurely to the Wolves in that Kentucky Downs stake where she didn't really do much running at all. But, I mean, it's just a tremendous drop in class to this New York bred maiden special weight. So I think she's one you certainly have to use. But as you said, it's a race loaded with first-time starters, all but 2. And I think there are a couple you have to look at. And I'll start with one is the 7, The Promise Road for George Weaver. His horses have just been running holes in the wind. He had a couple of easy wins yesterday. He's always very dangerous with first-time starters anyway. Joel Rosario takes them out. So he's certainly one I'm going to be using pretty heavily in the pick 5. Chad Brown has a first-time starter in Amity Island, who I'm not sure on the breeding here is out of Brody's Cause. I think he's a pretty new sire. But we've seen this with Chad Brown before. He puts horses on turf that don't look like they have a lot of turf breeding. They kind of get dismissed, and they wind up running just fine. So that's one I'm interested in as well. Those would be the 3 main ones for me. Curious which firsters you have your eye on.
Yeah, I mean, Herald Angel, I made her my top pick in this race. I just think she's a very logical horse, and she'll probably win if she shows up. And the other horse that has experience that I think you should use is the number 11, Violent I Am. She was intended for turf first time out. She was a turf entrant. She was not a main track only in that race that came off the turf. And she ran well that day. She even ran well last time in her second start in a scheduled dirt race. But I think switching to turf could work for her. She's got a couple siblings that seem to be best on on the turf. They were not world beaters by any stretch, but there is the pedigree for this one to handle the turf. And Irad Ortiz takes over for Kelsey Danner. So I would use that horse. But of the first-time starters, I was more interested in some prices. The Promised Road, I guess she's okay. She was entered once, I think, late in the meet at Saratoga, and the workout reports on her were not particularly strong. So maybe this one takes money, and Joel Rosario getting aboard, I guess, is a good sign, but I didn't necessarily see a report that this one was training that well. And the 10 Amity Island for Chad Brown, it's not a turf pedigree at all. I mean, we don't really know what Brody's cause is, but the two best siblings are those New York breds, Bluegrass Jamboree and Fierce Lady, both of who are dirt sprinters. So it's just kind of weird to see this horse on the turf. As you said, Chad Brown can do it. He's the one trainer who seems to get these horses with dirt pedigree to run on the turf. Just at a shorter price, I wasn't thrilled with her. The firster that actually intrigues me the most is the number 5, Cinderella's Cause. Look, these connections aren't known for winning with juveniles or first-time starters in general. Carl Grissmark, over the past 5 years in Formula, if you look it up, he's actually over 22 with firsters. But this horse has a turf pedigree. The Dam has produced one prior foal, Summer at the Spa, who's actually running earlier on this card if you want to look at her PPs. She is a horse who just is best on the turf. She won her debut going 6 furlongs on the turf last November at Aqueduct, and congrats as a decent turf sire. They paid a lot of money for this horse, the 2-year-old sale, based on this relatively modest pedigree, for her to go for $135,000. She worked 10-2 at that sale. She looked pretty quick. As I said, low profile connections, but that could mean that she gets ignored in this race, and she's bred for these conditions. So I just think she's a little interesting shipping in from Finger Lakes.
Yeah, I have no problem with that one. Always looking for a price in these kind of races. So I think it's an interesting pick 5 sequence. I think we talked about all the races. Obviously, going to have to make some decisions because we talked about more than a few horses in each of the races, but I do think it's one where if you can cash, you're going to get a price. I don't see this as being one of those huge chalk days that we could get. So I think it's going to be a good bet, and I will play the pick 5. I do want to give a shout out to my wife. I'm not sure how many of these races I'll be able to watch because it is my 28th anniversary on Saturday. If I make it that long, it'll mean she's put up with me for almost 3 decades, and that's involved a lot of Saturdays having to sit around watching horse racing. So I'm not sure I'll do that, but I will get my bet in before we make any plans.
Oh, well, an early happy anniversary to you and your wife. That's awesome to hear. And I agree with you. This seems like a bettable sequence. The races that bookend make it tough, but I think you can narrow down those stakes races in the middle enough to create a manageable pick 5 play. So I agree. This is one that I'll be looking to play as well. And that's it for the racing that we're going to talk about on this Saturday card. We didn't discuss those 2 2-year-old stakes earlier in the day, the Champagne and the Frisette. From a handicapping standpoint, I didn't have a whole lot to say about them, but I am very much looking forward to seeing how those races play out, especially seeing how Jackie's Warrior runs, because he's looked like something special in his first few starts, and I just want to see if he can handle the mile distance.
Yeah, same for me, and I'm actually looking forward to even reinvestment risk, see if he can close the gap a little with the extra distance. The Frisette, I admittedly haven't looked ahead too much, but so I'd say this is probably it as far as the big stakes go for Breeders' Cup prep races this weekend. So the next few weeks will probably be a lot of state-bred racing and lesser stakes. So if you're a Grade 1 fan of these big Grade 1 and Grade 2 races, buckle in because it's your last chance for a while.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot to recap this weekend when we do the Pacecast next week. And as we move forward in the coming weeks, we'll probably get into some Breeders' Cup previews and we'll talk about these races as they shape up because we typically know how those fields are going to come together a few weeks ahead of time. So we'll try to do some preview podcasts 2 or 3 weeks from now. So look forward to that in the near future. For now, remember, you can always listen to our podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back with the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.